Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Friday morning, June the 3rd, and this is One Shot Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and I'm just drinking coffee, trying to wake up, and I'm glad it's Friday. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody who's listening to my shows and just hanging around and just joining me on my healing journey. This is really my healing journey here in the morning, and we're looking at Robert Burney's webpages called Joy to You and Me, and he's an author, he's a codependence therapist, a grief therapist, he's a spiritual teacher, and he has a whole bunch of great web pages on his website, Joy to You and Me, and there are lots to do with codependency, relationship type stuff, boundaries, and all kinds of good stuff. So hopefully everybody will check it out. I did pop the link in there to this particular page we're looking at into the chat room. So it's http://www.joy and then JOY, the number 2 and then MEU.com/codependence, the number 2.htm. So Joy to You and Me is www.joy, JOY, the number 2, MEU.com. It's a great website, and we've been looking at this for a month now, and it's good stuff. And I think I like what he's written. Most of it makes sense to me, and I relate to a lot of it. So hopefully people are getting something out of it. So we'll just pick right up there. But I just want to let everybody know I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows here. I just want to be one more voice speaking out. I'm a survivor of child abuse, and I know that there's so many survivors out there. I just wanted to be one more voice. And this, and I thought, well, this is, is really my healing journey. But I know that so many people, I relate to so many survivors and what they've gone through. Not to everyone, because all of our situations have been different. All of our were different. You know what I mean? Everyone's different. Our situations were different, but still, we can all relate to some of it. You know what I mean? And that's just a lot of it is just the sadness and the grief and the pain of being abused, right? So I can relate to most people, excuse me, on that level. And so, I appreciate everybody who's tuning in, and I just want to be one more voice for survivors. And so you have to listen at your own discretion. To my shows I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a sensitive topic. I mean, I say this on every show, but it's important for people to know that it is your discretion to listen to anything. So, if you think the topic might bother you, or it's just going to upset you or make you feel worse than you already feel, don't listen to the show. Just turn it off, right? Everybody has to make the right decision for themselves. I'm perfectly okay listening and dealing with this stuff because I've had to deal with it my whole life. You know what I mean? I'm just dealing with the aftermath. I mean, this is no problem for me to talk about this stuff. What was really the problem was being abused and growing up in this dysfunctional, violent, abusive home. That was the problem, and that was a long time ago. So I'm in such a much better place now, but I know that a lot of people, may be still suffering and really having a hard time. So you have to be very careful what you're listening to, and things like this can trigger people, can cause people to feel very uncomfortable. So you have to be really aware of what makes you feel uncomfortable. And if you think the show might bother you, don't listen to any of the shows, because I'm talking about abuse, and it's a sensitive topic, And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show. And the reason why is because I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're all, standing up to fight to save children's lives. We're all volunteers and working really hard to try to, promote children's rights and protect children, and we'll be doing a whole lot more in the future. And we've done, Sandra Potter and Donna Shear have done a whole lot here, and a whole lot of people who work with them for the past almost 5 years, 4.5 years, and we'll be doing a whole lot more. So, you have to learn how to protect yourself online. If you're under the age of 18, just type into your browser internet safety, online safety, things like that. We'll bring you to websites that you can learn how to protect yourself. We just believe that every child should be protected at all times, and so that's why I ask young people under the age of 18 to have permission to listen to my show. So get someone to listen to the show with you who's older, who's an adult, who can help you make a decision whether you should be listening. I have a lot of therapists and psychotherapists and counselors and whatnot listening to my show. There's a lot of adult content on my shows, And I just think that young people should be protected. So if you're under the age of 18, do yourself a favor, me a favor, and have an adult listen to the show with you and make sure that it's something you should be listening to. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we're going to get right into this particular page here. And we were looking at this yesterday, and this is sort of how we're actually almost all the way through there, but I just wanted to finish it up. This was codependence versus interdependence, and Robert Birdie was saying, that interdependence, we have to actually be interdependent on people, right? It says in order to live, we need to be interdependent. We cannot participate in life without giving away some power over our feelings and our welfare. And he says, I'm not talking here just about people. If we put money in a bank, we're giving some power over our feelings and welfare to that bank. If we have a car, we have a dependence on it, and we'll have feelings if something happens to it. If we live in society, we have to be interdependent to some extent and give some power away. And the key is to be conscious in our choices and our own responsibility for the consequences. And so, he says the ways to healthy interdependence is to be able to see things clearly, to see people, situations, life dynamics, and most of all ourselves clearly. If we are not working on healing our childhood wounds and changing our childhood programming, then we cannot begin to see ourselves clearly, let alone anything else in life. So, he's making some rather simple, but good points there. How can we know, what's going on in our own lives and what we need out of life and what we truly need to work on if we're not going to take a look at ourselves and learn how to change some of these behaviors. And that's exactly where I'm at. I've been doing this for 4 years. Probably started a long time ago. I know that I did. I started a long, long time ago trying to change some of the behaviors and the really bizarre belief systems that I had because of my parents. Because my parents were mentally ill and they brought us up to believe a whole lot of very strange things. And so, it was, my belief systems was so different from other people's when I was a kid. People would they thought it was funny. Mostly I think they thought it was a joke or I was funny because a lot of the stuff that I would say would be so different than what other people would say. And I'm not sure. I think because most of my friends obviously were my age, they didn't quite know what I was probably even talking about sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, I was, at the age of 7 talking about the government and the fact that, people were out to get us and people, because that's what our parents told us, that, everyone was out to get us and that, the world was an unsafe place. And our parents taught us that as well because of the abuse and the dysfunction. So, because my parents were abused, right, when they were children. So they were also mentally ill, some because of the abuse, probably the psychological damage, and some was just, other issues going on, chemical imbalances and whatnot. So, it's quite hard to grow up with those kind of belief systems and then have to change it all around, realizing that most healthy people, who have a good sense of, of what's healthy in this life and what's not, I had to kind of try to model myself after them. So I had some real good positive people in my life, which some people never do. And I think that's probably why I got as far as I did get, you know what I mean? It's because I was watching very carefully those people that I felt were having a good life and living a decent life and treating people properly. I started to kind of try to mimic their behaviors, because even into my, I'd say real early 20s, I was still such a very harsh person, because of the abuse that I suffered, and I was very hateful to people. I would tell my bosses off. I would tell coworkers off, and I don't mean just, tell them off. I mean, I would cuss them out and curse them, and, I wouldn't beat people up because I didn't want to go to jail, but, I was just a horrible person, and I started to realize that, those behaviors were caused because of the way I was treated as a child, and I thought, man, I got to straighten myself up, like, I'm never going to have any good relationships with people or working relationships or anything, or even personal relationships with friends and whatnot, if I don't change these attitudes and these beliefs, and these behaviors. So really, we have to look very carefully at ourselves all the way through, especially if we grew up in a dysfunctional, abusive type home. Excuse me, my voice is terrible today. But if we're going to make a difference in our lives, if we're going to change this thing for the better, we really have to get down to the real problems and what they are and work on them. And it's hard sometimes to see these things. Like, still, I'm sure I do stuff that is somewhat self-sabotaging that I don't even realize I'm doing. But I'm starting to get a lot more cognitive and clear about my behaviors now than I ever was. Maybe it's just age or something, I don't know. But and it probably has a lot to do with the fact that I'm feeling pretty stable now, and things are much more stabilized for me 4 years later after I started my real healing journey. And so I'm able to kind of take some time and look at some of this stuff. Whereas before I was just in too much pain and I couldn't see clearly to make these changes. So it has helped me, to allow myself to heal. But now I don't have the same problems looking at this stuff that I used to, 4 years ago for sure, and before that. So he says the disease of codependence causes us to keep repeating patterns that are familiar. So this is sort of where we left off yesterday. He says, so we pick untrustworthy people to trust, undependable people to depend on, unavailable people to love, and by healing our emotional wounds and changing our intellectual programming, we can start to practice discernment in our choices so that we can change our patterns and learn to trust ourselves. That's kind of interesting, that we might pick untrustworthy people to trust, undependable people to depend on, unavailable people to love. I think that's rather interesting. I know that my sister and I, we talk quite a bit. We're closest in age, so we shared a room forever. We didn't necessarily get along. We haven't really gotten along our whole lives. We're just a symbiote. We're just like, what do you call that? Where things exist together, but they're not really, together. Like we're not that close. You know what I mean? But we're the closest in age, so we just sort of hung out and sort of managed to develop some type of relationship because we're 5 years apart. We're the closest in age, so we shared a room for a long time. So that's why I think we kind of developed some type of relationship, sister relationship. We're still not all that close, and we're not all that caring towards each other, which is really sad. But she we used to talk about some of this stuff about how we probably choose people in our life that are very much the type of people that we're comfortable being around, which are abusive type people. Because all her marriages, like her one marriage, she was married to this guy she didn't want to marry in the first place because he was abusive, but my mother kind of forced her to marry this guy, and just to get her out of the house, I think. My sister was 20 years old. My mom was tired of looking at her, and my mom really kind of put her foot down and said, "You're marrying that guy," and slapped my sister around. I watched this. I was in the room, and my sister was like, "I don't want to marry him." My sister was 20. She could have told my mom to buzz off. She could have moved out and got her own apartment. Like, my sister was very much in a bad place, like me, our whole growing up, our whole lives. Like, she had so many problems, and she doesn't want to admit it, and she thinks it's just great, but it's because she doesn't want to look at it, and I think she's very much, what do you want to call that, dissociative, and she's got some real problems. But she does good in life, and she works, and she holds down jobs, and she can function, right? We're all high functioning, which is great. Not all of us. Some of my siblings weren't, but the girls seem to be high functioning. My sister Irene was high functioning. She owned her own businesses and companies and whatnot. But in the meantime, so extremely screwed up. You know what I mean? But it's pretty sad, that my sister would pick this guy and actually follow through with it and marry this guy just because my mother forced her to, really, which is ridiculous, but she went for it anyway, to marry this guy, you know what I mean? And he was a complete abuser, he was just an abusive man, physically, psychologically, emotionally, and he was a good guy, and she, of course, she was in love with him at first, but they were dating for quite a long time before they got married, and she loved him, but didn't want to marry him because she could see these problems, but she went ahead and married him anyway. Then she, later on, she divorced him, thank God, and 14 years later, and then she got in this other relationship for about 7 years that was dysfunctional and abusive, psychological, not physically, but psychological and emotional abuse from this other guy. So she just doesn't know how to pick people in her lives, and that's what he's saying. So we pick untrustworthy people to trust, undependable people to depend on, unavailable people to love, which is very, very, very interesting because that's what she did. And for me, I was kind of the opposite, you know what I mean? Like, I thought, no way, I want to be treated with dignity and I want to be treated with respect. And, I watched my mom suffer at the hands of my dad for, my whole life. And even after she was dead, he was still dissing her. He was still running her down, and he's still talking bad about her. And my mother, people say, well, she was your main abuser. How could you even have any feelings towards her, you know what I mean? Because she was the one who really caused me the most pain in my life. But it's because I loved my mother very much. The relationship between me and my dad was pretty cold. I really didn't care about him. And my mother would say stuff like, well, he's sick. He's a sick man. And I'd be like, I know, and I hate him. But that's because I watched him abuse all of my siblings and her and, myself, right? So it was, just didn't have any feelings towards him, especially when I was growing up. I was actually kind of mean to him because he was mean to everybody else, and I wasn't really necessarily afraid of him because I thought, well, if he's going to kill me, he may as well just go ahead and do it because I figured he was just mostly just threatening. He was always threatening to kill the whole family all the time, and because he was psychotic and mentally ill, right? Having all kinds of episodes that the devil, we were the devil's children and we deserved to die because God would be happy, things like this, right? He was mentally ill. And just saying things like he would kill us at night. He's, I'll kill you all when you're sleeping and things like this, right? But I didn't take him all that seriously, and I swung a bat at his head and knocked him in the head one time when I thought he was attacking my mother. Because my mother had just had surgery and he was in bothering her and she was begging him to leave. I actually detailed it in my book, Life of Death, The Redemption, but I didn't care. I was like, what are you gonna do? Kill me? Go ahead, right? Well, I mean, he could have. He nearly did. But the thing is, it's these people. I didn't have a relationship with him. I still don't to this day. But the thing is, my mother. I loved my mother very much, and I wanted her to love me too. She couldn't do it, and so it's really quite sad. But she was my main abuser. But I don't care. It's not right to watch anybody suffer. You know what I'm saying? Like people say, well, how could you even think about protecting your mother, after she did what she did to you and was hurting you, you know what I mean, like on a regular basis and trying to destroy you, and I'm like, well, because I loved her, you know what I mean, and I didn't think what was happening to her was right either. I didn't think what she was doing to me was right either, but I didn't want to watch her suffer, and I didn't want to see anybody in my family suffer. So, it's kind of hard. We was very, very hard, so I decided when I got older and I started thinking about, these relationships with these guys, I thought, because I'm very much interested in men, but I thought, there's no way I'm going to let somebody treat me like that. No way. I have to put my foot down. I decided early on in my life that I would demand respect but I have to give it then too, right? So, I've had issues learning how to behave myself because of the abuse that I suffered. I kind of just picked up these patterns, especially from my mother, these ways of dealing with things and coping. So, I tend to hurt the people I'm around, right? So, it's been men in my life. I haven't had very many because I don't trust very many people, but I had a couple relationships, and the first one was not very good. I was talking about that. We had to break off, and he left. It was a good thing he did because we would have probably killed each other, right? And this man that I'm with now for 16 years, he's awesome. Like he's a good man, and nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. We both said and done things that are hurtful, but we make up and we say, you know what, we've got to do better than that. Like we totally love each other so much that we want to be the right person for each other, and I think that's true love. Is to be able to say, I want the best for you, no matter what it is. And we don't intentionally hurt each other. Like we intentionally love each other, and I think that's great. And I realize, that's because I demand respect and dignity and decency in a relationship. And he's good with that, and he does the same. He wants to be treated the same way, with dignity and love and respect, and so we respect each other. We treat each other with dignity. We care about each other. And this is what I took the complete opposite of how I grew up, and I watched my mother be abused in every way. And my sister abused, right? My other sister was the abuser, actually. My oldest sister, she was abusing her husband and her children, right? She was a horrible woman, but she was the firstborn. She was the firstborn, and I was the lastborn, and she spent the longest. She knew my mother when she was younger, and she said there was no change. My mother was the same way with them as she was with me, so she said, that's just how our mother was, right? So she grew up in the same home I did. She became an abuser too, right? So pretty sad, but that's true. And my other sister kind of just became this, she was a good mother. Like she is a good mother, and she raised her daughter the best she could. And she's definitely not an abuser, but she's definitely codependent and dysfunctional. So she's got a few problems, but at least she didn't abuse her daughter. She was good to her daughter, and she treated her very well and treated her right. She let her get away with everything, but that's because there was no proper discipline in our home. It was either you get beat on just for coming in the room, or you could get caught doing something that was bad that you think, well, maybe I deserve to have some type of punishment. It doesn't have to be physical, but maybe take away a few privileges or grounded or something, and you'd get away with it. So there was no rhyme or reason to. There was really no normal punishment in my home. It was just we were just punching bags, right? So that's why it didn't matter whether you were good or bad, you were still going to get beaten on, and it didn't matter what the reason was. It could be just because you had a certain look on your face. I mean, that's most of my beatings were because I had a look on my face. My mother didn't like this look on my face. It was a good reason for her. She could always say, "Take that look off your face," right? My mother was like, she didn't have to have a good excuse that I didn't have to be doing anything wrong. I could just come in the room and grab something out of the fridge, and she'd say, "What do you do with that look on your face?" And of course, I'd be like, "What look?" And as soon as I said that, she'd be up ready to beat my ass and chase me down and beat on me and kick me around. And, you're a horrible child. You're rotten. This is how I grew up. Like I didn't have to be doing anything wrong. I just come in the room, right? So I quite avoided her quite a bit. Sometimes you get thirsty, And it's not like she was bringing cookies and milk to me, you know what I mean? I had to go and I had to get my own stuff. So, I mean, like, if I was thirsty, a lot of times I'd just be outside drinking from the hose, like if I'd stay away. Like, my mother was a highly volatile, violent woman who wanted to beat up on somebody and just chose me because I was the last one in the home, right? But, this is the thing, like, we don't want to pick people like that, like, we don't want to repeat these patterns. That's what he's saying. The disease of codependence causes us to keep repeating patterns that are familiar. So we pick untrustworthy people to trust, undependable people to depend on, unavailable people to love, and by healing our emotional wounds and changing our intellectual programming, we can start to practice discernment in our choices so that we can change our patterns and learn to trust ourselves. So I think this is where I'm at. Like, I've really learned how to see what I need out of life, that I want to be treated with dignity, excuse me, and that everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. That's why I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, because no child should ever suffer, ever, at the hands of another person like that. I mean, I don't care whether it's physical, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, I don't care. Like, no child deserves to be hurting because somebody decides to hurt them. Like, that is, it's so incredibly wrong. And yet, it happens every day, all the time. Parents are always hurting their children, and it's just not right. It's not right at all. What's wrong with bringing up your children with love and respect and decency, and telling your children, "I love you, son. I love you, daughter. I love you, my family." What's wrong with that? You don't hear that. I don't know if anybody even says those things anymore, but it seems to me that they should be saying them every day. You know what I mean? My family, like, my parents never told us that. They never gathered us around and said, we just love our family. Let's go to the park. Let's go do something today. Let's have a family day, and I just love you, children. No, there was none of that. My parents weren't together on anything, so they never got together to say anything to us. So they never separately said anything to us. One time, I was actually thinking about this last night. I was thinking about the fact that I could never get my parents to say they loved me when I was young, and I used to write them little cards and stuff, right, on pieces of paper. I'd draw them little pictures, and I'd say, "I love you, Mommy," or "I love you, Daddy," or whatever. And then they wouldn't say anything back. I'd give it to them, and I'd be like, "I love you, Mommy." And I used to do this for my dad, but not very often. It was mostly my mother. And I'd be like, "I love you, Mom," and she wouldn't say anything back. And I'd give one to my dad, and I'd be like, "I love you, Dad." This is when I was really little, right? And he wouldn't say anything back. And then before going to bed, I used to say goodnight, and because they wouldn't come in and tuck me in and kiss me goodnight or anything like that. Like, if I go into bed, I just went to bed whenever. So when I was going to bed, I'd go say goodnight to everybody, and of course they were all sitting in their own dysfunctional, suicidal thoughts, right? And I'd be like, "I love you," and they would never say anything back, right? They were never in the same room together because it was just a fight all the time. So they never really stayed much in the same room for very long. So I would go find where they were. And then one time I actually called my dad on it, and I said, when I was older, I said, "How come you never ever say you love me back? I always say I love you guys, and you never ever say it to me." My dad says, "I'm not going to say that, And then my mother, "I don't think I should have to say that." They just were so hateful. I mean, so you don't tell, your 8-year-old, 7-year-old child or whatever, or 6-year-old child that you don't love them. And that's exactly what my mom used to do. She'd be like, "I don't love you. I hate you." And I'd be like, that hurts. That really sucks. It's like to do that to a child, and people do it. And so don't you ever do that if you're a parent. Never. You cherish your children and love them and show them the way to go. And they'll grow up properly if you do that for them. But if you're just going to hurt them, they're going to hurt you too. Or they'll go and they'll hurt themselves or somebody else, right? So it's the choices that we make, totally it is. And so I mean now I can't go back and get that love from them, but I can get that from other people. I have great friends, and I've got a sweetheart who loves me very much, and that's all that matters to me, and I got a God that loves me even more. So, that's the thing. I mean, I can't go back and change that stuff and get what I needed from them. But the thing is I can make sure that the relationships that I'm in now are good relationships, and I think that's very important for that whole, not to be re-victimized, you know what I mean? Like, not to allow ourselves to live our lives in these patterns of behavior. So that's these abusive behaviors with other people. Like, that's what my mother did. That's why she was a good example. Excuse me. She was a good example for me for what not to do. And that's why, I think that I've had, some success in making the right decisions for myself, because I watched what happened to her. She was abused as a child. I knew this. And then to be in this marriage with a husband who did not ever tell her he loved her. I mean, I don't know. Maybe when they were first married he did, but I know that for many, many years, probably before I was born, I'm pretty sure it was pretty loveless. But my sister Irene was kind of backed me up on that. Like, she would talk about stuff that was going on in the family, and she was the oldest, and then there was Kevin, and he was the next oldest. There was no love in their marriage, even from when they first got married. They weren't able to show it. They weren't able to to be kind to each other, to be good to each other from the beginning. And my mother used to talk about that, and she'd say, even before they were married, my dad was abusive towards her, but he married her to get out of this abusive home that she married him to get out of this abusive home, because my dad, he thought he should be married. He was in the service, and he thought he should be married because all of his buddies were married. So he had this little crush on a lot of women. Actually, he talks about that. But he also had this crush on my mother, and he was jealous of her before they were even married, because my dad's a sick and mentally twisted old man, right? Who thinks it's okay to rape his wife and hurt his family. Just thinks that's fine, right? Horrible. And so he was horrible to her the whole time that they were married. Now, my mother used to tell me stuff about the fact that the first 2 weeks that they were married, he was already abusive towards her and forcing her to do things sexually that she did not want to do. She would talk about stuff. But my mother was always talking about she was a victim. She was very much a victim her whole life. I mean, she was abused as a child horrifically by my grandmother, her mother, who was a horrible woman who killed one of her own sons and beat up a whole bunch of orphans. And this is a true, honest-to-God thing here. She didn't get arrested. There was nothing said to her. She abused these orphans. They took off. They ran away. They ended up on the street because my grandmother abused these kids, that she took in and from this orphanage. I don't know how many there were. I think my mom said it was 7 or something like that, or 8. And there was already a bunch of kids in the home because my mother was the oldest of 7 children. So, it was a big family already. My grandmother killed one of her sons already, and then was beating on these orphans with a horsewhip. My grandmother horsewhipped my mother, kicked them around, beat them up, called them names. She was horrible. So what did my mother do to me? Same thing, minus the horsewhip. Just anything else she could get on. Couldn't horsewhip. Anything she could get her hands on, she would beat me with it. Didn't matter what it was, or just her fist. She didn't care, Just the same thing her did to her. Her, calling her names, horrible names, and screaming in her and cursing her around. As my mother, then my mother me to be like her. My mother was creating me to be like her, so then I would have become my mother. And I did become, sort of did become my mother when I was younger, because the behaviors that I had were very much mimicking and modeling after her. It was horrible. I beat up my little friends, slap my friends around, call people names, destroy things. I was a destructive person, just like my mother, violent and hurtful until I realized I was hurting people, and I didn't want to do that. But I used to get beaten for that too, right? So my mother would show me how to hurt people, and then she would beat me for it, right? It's kind of a great excuse. It's like, oh, I created a monster. Now I get to discipline it, and discipline to my mother was a good a beating that could kill you. So pretty bad. But anyway, we've got a minute left here, but we'll finish this here. But it is important. We have to learn how to pick people who will treat us with dignity and respect. And I think every human being on this planet deserves that. And I know I'm not alone in that thinking. I mean, it's just actually the right way to think. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And so we have to make sure in our relationships now, that we actually demand that, but we also have to give it. because it won't come back to us if we don't give it, right? So we have to sometimes change our own behaviors too, right? So thanks everybody for being here. I'll be back on the weekend as well as my shows next week. So we'll just be continuing on here with these web pages. Have a great weekend, everybody. I hope you take good care of yourselves. And like I say on every show, you make sure that you never ever give up and never ever give in. Just keep with it. If you can't cope, make sure you phone somebody. If nobody's around, call a crisis line, because it's so important that you stick around. There's better days, but you have to be here for them, right? My brothers didn't stick around, sadly enough, and they let my parents win this fight, right? So, but I refuse to do that. Like, I'm gonna have a great life, and I would say that I'm well on my way. And it's because I refuse to let my parents win this fight. The abuse that I suffered is not going to destroy my life, because I refuse to let it. Because then that lets my parents win and a sibling, and I refuse to do that. Like, I'm going to have a good life, and it's really a slap in their face. That too bad you couldn't kill me, haha. Right? So it makes me happy. So make sure you do stick around, get some help, and if you have to, you call a crisis line, you get some help with counselor, therapist, group support. I don't care. There's lots of different avenues and different ways out there. We're all different, right? So you do what you have to get well, and to enjoy this life. But we have to be ultimately our best advocates. We have to be our own best advocates, and we have to make these choices. Nobody else can do it for us, right? So we got to make the right choices for ourselves, right? So stick around. If you can't cope, you make the right choice, and you phone somebody, and you phone a crisis line, right? So have a great day, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.